it feels like you've got a little bit of optimism. Am I
I
wrong?
do have some optimism. And one of my staff said to me the other day, how do you stay hopeful? And I do stay hopeful because I feel like I've got the most important players talking to me every day.
Yeah.
They really are the ones who can make a difference, the companies and the investors. This isn't something that an advocacy organization can change, but with this group committed to doing what's right, and I really do think they are committed to doing what's right, that there's the change is coming.
Welcome to the latest episode of Trailblaze, the podcast where we talk about the America we are becoming, the ideas, the people. I'm your host, Nayyera Huck.
Hi, I'm Jamal Simmons. It's good to be here. Hi, Nayyera.
Good to chat with you, Jamal. I have been fascinated, horrified, wondering so many things about the fires. We are calling them the LA fires, but the wildfires that are surrounding LA and the cities around it. And I think there's a lot to dig into, whether it's climate change or is it budget? Why is this happening? But we also have a guest joining us today who's going to give us a little bit of that inside outside game of how do you solve for things like the wildfires?
Oh, yeah. We're going to talk to her. And I think I'm excited about this because there are all kinds of ways that these things are coming together, where you've got climate change, which frankly Al Gore has been talking about my entire adult life, right? Like what's coming. And now we all see the fires, the heat waves, the storm intensity, all the things that he talked about a long time ago in that movie and in his slideshow presentation, all that stuff is now starting to come true.
The slideshow.
At the same time, we've got all this. Yeah, it was a slideshow. Actually, I'm old enough to remember when it was literally like he used to like do a projector when he would give this thing. It's crazy. But
so many inconvenient truths right here. One of them being how old we are.
I know. But I think so it's Al Gore talked about it. The corporate influence, what's happening with states, and what's happening with Republicans who apparently the denial is so intense that even when faced with these disasters, they just can't wrap their minds around the truth that we're facing this climate disaster face head on.
Well, I have two theories about why climate ignorance or dismissal still exists, because it's not really skepticism anymore. The information is out there. The science is there. There's an entire generation that grew up keenly aware that climate change poses an existential threat to the entire planet, right?
It's truth
climate
is out there.
Ignorance or denial, climate denialism. And it's the tech bros of the world. They're building their bunkers. They think that they can make their money right now and they're going to be fine when everybody can't live on the surface because they'll live underground. And this is not a joke. You really should look up the bunkers that some of these tech bros have. And then the other's like, well, I live in the moment and it doesn't matter because this will be for somebody else to deal with, which is a whole nother way of doing governance and living life. Those are not the people I want in charge of making decisions for my kids and future generations. But I have students right now who in their 20s who say they're never going to have kids because they don't believe we're going to solve climate change.
Oh, they just haven't had enough sex yet. They'll have to. Listen, there's one thing you can count on with humans. Babies are coming. But these are the same tech bros, who own these social media companies. And, a lot of them don't let their kids have social media accounts while they push them at our kids so that everybody can use them. It's amazing when you find out how many people in Silicon Valley don't allow their preteens and teens to have social media accounts while everybody else is being fed garbage by the algorithms.
The other thing I've seen going around on social media is this question of budget, right? And so much of how our taxpayer dollars used ends up being the conversation, and is it being used, prioritizing it the right way? And climate change isn't just about prevention. It's also about what are you doing right now to talk about the future. It's what I mean by this is there's no amount of recycling that I could do that's going to solve climate change emissions for the entire United States. There's a massive corporate piece of this. So how is that going to take place? Are we just going to be giving oil and gas companies tax breaks to drill, baby drill? Or is there going to be some kind of accountability or some kind of regulation that forces these companies to adapt to the modern reality?
Yeah, I'm old enough to also remember when carbon tax was a conservative idea, the idea of trading carbon credits between companies and municipalities so that we could all lower the total amount of carbon we were producing. So high carbon industries, high carbon producers would get a certain amount. They would buy credits from low carbon states, and we'd have this secondary market that exists, this market that existed to be able to bring down the cost. And then Republicans finally decided, oh no, it's not. We can't even have a market-based solution, which of course Republicans and conservatives are supposed to be all about the free market. You can't have a market-based solution to deal with a big problem because the oil and gas industries, let's just call it what it is, the oil and gas industries are invested in people using oil and gas. So anything that lowers the amount of oil and gas being used, they're going to be against, even if the entire society will suffer.
The idea of greenwashing, right? There's the corporation that makes itself look good by doing great things. It used to be, let's just end hunger in Africa, and corporations getting involved with that, even though those were many of the same corporations who were doing the mining and doing the child labor that created many of these problems. We have that now with oil and gas companies, greenwashing. Keep an ey out when you see British Petroleum ads, BP oil ads, and they're talking about
I was just thinking
going
about that.
green, right? I mean, it's like, guys, this, okay, I appreciate and respect the marketing, the branding, but really?
Well, and the new
going green?
the new phrase from like a decade ago. So it was green, and then green got to be sort of whatever crunchy. So it became clean, right? It became clean tech, clean energy, clean gas, clean coal. Clean coal was the big one, right? Clean coal. There is no such thing as clean coal. All coal is dirty by nature, because it has to be. You're burning a fossil fuel, and what it takes to go get the coal is also a dirty process and very dangerous. From a family of coal miners, used to be in West Virginia. Like all of that requires people to do really dirty and nasty things. Now, there is a question about how do we transition, right? How do we go from people being wood burning, chopping down trees, right, which happens in a lot of poor countries. You chop down the trees, you burn the trees for energy, creates a huge amount of carbon emissions. Also, deforestation removes the ability for trees to take carbon out of the environment. So how do we go from trees to a very clean technology like solar or natural gas or what are the other kind of maybe even nuclear at some point, although I think nuclear has a whole other problem with what do you do with
It's got a reputation
waste.
problem. It's got a reputation problem. It actually is very, very clean and can solve a lot of our issues, but it's everyone thinks Chernobyl when they hear nuclear.
Yeah, and then there are all these, there are all these things about how do we smash together, new sources that are probably pretty expensive today to do, but we're solving some of the physics problems about creating energy. We just haven't figured out how to do it on a massive enough scale at a low enough cost that consumers could have access to it. So there are some things that are out there that could work. We just got to spend the money and the time to figure it out. But you know who's in the way? Oil and gas.
Oil and gas. Well, and also
gas.
What they've done, messaging, marketing, branding, is make it seem like, well, this is something that I individually need to do, that this is not a collective action systemic thing.
Right.
And
plant a tree, recycle.
Even that idea of, oh, they're going to come from my gas stove. That's the better way to cook, right? It's going to change the taste of my food. No. That's actually not what climate change folks and who are trying to do. They want, for example, Honeywell, perhaps to stop using certain types of carbons in their machines. And that would change air conditioners around the world.
Yeah.
Right. If we were able to do something like that, and it is actually a market interest too. But like you said, the denial of the market interest when it comes up against a different interest. And so the market interest, clearly there is a demand for clean, green, whatever you call it, environmentally friendly. So many companies have propped up to try to tap into that desire to be having more ethical solutions. And the people of California voted the way they voted. They have the governor that they have, and that governor made emissions for California a high standard for meeting emissions. And guess what? Car manufacturers around the country, because California is the largest market for cars, well, guess what? All of our cars are going to meet the California standard, because why would we make two different sets of cars?
Absolutely.
Right.
And
For
then that
years, they
happens
do.
all over the world. Right. That happens all over the world. You do it for California, and it becomes the standard for America, and then it becomes the standard for the
But that
world.
was a democracy solution and a market driven solution, both
Yep.
of which, as you said, MAGA and oil and gas reject. But this does come back to California because of its unique climate change challenges, not just with the, like we said, the policies that they've able to institute as being a massive economy, but bringing it back to the wildfires. That this is, we are seeing the what we think looks like apocalypse in our video screens, in our social media, where people are standing at home surrounded by fire. This is not even a future problem anymore. This is a now problem.
Oh, it's absolutely a now problem. And, I remember when, we had these huge storms in the Gulf, obviously, and everyone would see the wreckage and devastation that would occur. And then now we're seeing this happen with the fires in California. And I remember hearing about like, oh, there'll be like really intense fires and they may occur. And you just think, oh, well, that will happen, like there's always a fire in California. There's always a fire somewhere. And maybe that fire gets to be a little bit out of control. And maybe somebody who lives in the forest is going to, lose their home. But now you're seeing these really big houses and, communities that overlook the ocean that are being destroyed. And then you're seeing working class places like Altadena where, generations of, Black families have lived and they're losing their homes as well. And so, from Malibu all the way in this sort of semicircles, like a weird semicircle around Los Angeles, we're seeing all this devastation that's occurring in families. And let me just say this. When I was 18, I had a house fire and we lost everything that we owned. I was in college at the time, so it wasn't the same in the sense of the magnitude of having a home you had for a long time. But I know what it's like to stand in front of the place where you live. And I had all my stuff from home. I had it all in the house. And so I know what it's like to watch everything that go up in smoke, right? Literally flames coming out. And then when it's over the next day and the fire departments are leaving and you're literally sifting through the rubble, just trying to find something that is familiar, right? That you could take with you out of this devastation. And I remember, I lost my stereo and I lost like my expensive leather jacket and a bunch of clothes and stuff. But the stuff that mattered the most, which were things like letters from my grandparents and my high school, senior trip photo album and, the things that truly are irreplaceable. And then, what happens when that happens after that, who shows up? The American Red Cross shows up. And the American Red Cross showed up and they had, remember those bags of those toiletry kits you get when you're on a long flight to go across the country or something? They had these toiletry kits and they hand you the toiletry kit. It's got a toothbrush and toothpaste and whatever inside, deodorant. And then they hand you like a voucher to go and buy clothes from Target or Marshall's or whatever place you can go buy. And then they hand you another voucher to get a hotel room for the night. That's all you have. You have the clothes on your body, you have this toiletry kit, and you have these vouchers, right? So I literally gave money to the Red Cross immediately as soon as this happened. I've given money to them over the years, but I did it immediately. And that's all you have. So I think about these people. We lost our home. We lost our kind of roommate. Luckily, everybody was safe when it happened. We lost our little roommate community. But I think about people who now, they don't have anything around them. None of their neighbors are going to be there when they come back. The dry cleaner they use is gone. The grocery store, the Chinese restaurant that they got their dinner from 3 times a month, like all that stuff is gone. And the loss, the human scale of the loss beyond just the economic impact, what this will mean for families and communities, to me, it can bring tears to your eyes because it's so devastating.
I'm really glad that you shared that and made it more of a personal understanding, because what you're talking about is really climate refugees, or what it means to be a refugee. And we have a technical term for it, but that loss of identity, that loss of your sense of place in time, your sense of place in community, and suddenly what? Like what? What do you do? Where do you go? How do you rebuild?
Where do you go?
That is the challenge, the global challenge. And there are refugees from conflict, there are refugees from climate change. All of that, though, we've just never really applied that term to people born and raised in the United States until now.
And I've got friends right now in LA.
Like that's what
probably
Altadena, that's they're climate refugees now.
Totally. I mean, I've got friends right now who live in LA and Southern California, and they've got 2 and 3 different, households that are using their house, either literally living in their house or using their house for power or using their house to take showers. And people are kind of coming together. But here's the thing about that, because I've been one of those people who had to go stay in someone's home after you lost your stuff in a fire. it's always so long that kind of works out, right? Like
Yeah.
whether you want to stay there or they want you to stay there, you got to figure out, sooner or later, you got to figure out where to go. If you've got means, you can figure that out. But if you don't, if all you had, if your entire life savings was in a house, these 80-year-old people who maybe they bought a house 50 years ago for $100,000 or $75,000, and that house is maybe now worth $1 million or so dollars. That was their entire life savings. They don't have anything else. So when the insurance companies pull out, when the state tells you we don't know if we're going to rebuild for a year or give you money for it, what do these people do? It's devastating. So you talk about climate refugees. That's some of those people will not look like the people who we think of coming to our country, with backpacks on their backs. They'll look like senior white elderly people who don't have
we'll be seeing that from Alaska coming down to the lower 48, whether it's because the economy isn't sustainable anymore, but right, that's all melting up there. California's on fire. Everything, food and growth patterns are all changing. I mean, this is what makes people have to move, but move and do what?
Yeah. This is going to be a huge. We are going to be wrestling with this as a globe, not just as a country, for a long time. And when you think about what's happening in all the kind of Western or Northern countries, the G8, the wealthier countries in the world, this is happening in the United States, it's happening in Europe. This northern migration of people from the Southern Hemisphere, as deserts get bigger, storms get more powerful, and these climate refugees, people are starting to flee and leave because they also now have access to technology. So people can see everyone living pretty well in London or New York or LA or wherever it is we are. And then they decide, oh, well, things don't really seem so great around here. We've got a repressive regime. We've got, food is scarce, clean water is scarce. I can try to go somewhere else.
Well,
and
you know where all those Californians are going to go, and it's going to change some things. They're going to go to Texas, which is apparently going to Texas is fine as long as you're not a Californian. That's when Texans get really upset at you. Like, just don't be from California. This idea that movement and that human need and connection and community is really the exact opposite, though, of what we're hearing from the MAGA movement, which is me, myself, and I. Forget everybody else. Like, you asked the question, what would be said about the 80-year-olds who were living paycheck to paycheck on Social Security, but they had their home. Yep. They lose their home. What I suspect Elon Musk would probably say is, you're shit out of luck. Right? Oh, well, that's how it rolls. That's how it goes. And this idea.
Now it's free market. Now it's very free market. Right? Now we're going to talk about the market forces.
Yeah. Well, bringing this back to the challenge that we've had of being told that this is an individual problem to solve as climate change, when it's really a deep corporate systemic challenge. Joining us now is our special guest for this podcast. It is Reverend Kirsten Spalding, and she is the vice president of working with investors at Ceres. They're an organization that works directly on that inside part of the game with the companies and the financial service folks to solve the problem of climate change. Welcome, Kirsten.
Delighted to be with you.
So just to get us started, I think one of the things that prompted this conversation, and Nayyera, you can hop in, because Nayyera sent me a text talking about how BlackRock had backed out of this climate coalition that I believe you're a part of, the Net Zero Asset Managers. So can you just walk us through where we are right now with these big financial institutions that a few years ago were all about ESG and environmental and social governance, and they were all about ESG, and they were trying to find ways to deal with climate change, but now it feels like we're all facing a little bit of a backlash.
I do think that the asset managers I work with are feeling that there's quite a bit of pressure coming on them as they try and navigate their own practices, but also their participation with groups in particular. So we were very sorry to see BlackRock leave the initiative, Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative. But I do think that at least my communication with them, they intend to continue doing the work. What was problematic was being in a coalition. And from my perspective, each one has to move individually in response to their clients, their fiduciary duty. They're working across, of course, BlackRock, every jurisdiction. So there are lots of regulatory pressures on them, in addition to political pressures here in the United States. But I think the key is that these individual asset managers and the owners, the pensions, the insurance companies, the endowments, they have to have a shared ambition of really addressing climate risk and looking for those opportunities in the climate transition. And that's really where I hope we're going to keep working with BlackRock, and certainly where the others in my network are focused.
So the asset managers and private equity and all these entities that ultimately are managing money on behalf of shareholders and others, you mentioned fiduciary responsibility, and it's what makes them so different than big entities like a federal government. The federal government's ultimate responsibility is to the general public. So is there an argument, or have they absorbed the argument, that it is also their fiduciary responsibility to do right by the planet, by consumers?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the big pension funds, they are responsible to every participant in the fund. And so when you think about a public pension fund like CalPERS, the California Public Employee Retirement System, they really are responsible to the public, because that's all of the public employees in the state of California, and they're beneficiaries. So even when they retire, they're responsible to pay out benefits to their children and grandchildren. So the fund really does take a long-term, big picture view about what matters. But the bottom line is they have to produce retirement benefits. And so they see climate as, we all see it as an existential crisis, but it's a crisis for the portfolio. When you see things like the fires in Los Angeles, I mean, this is devastating to the people and the animals, all of the parts of the ecosystem in Los Angeles, of course. But for a fund like CalPERS, that means the real estate, the insurance holdings, the energy systems, the electric utilities, the transportation systems, everything is going to take a hit when you see a climate, an extreme event like these fires. And I guess what the funds are saying is these events are happening more and more frequently, with more and more impact on the fund, and so they're really thinking about those risks. I think my conversations have really shifted over the last 6 months. And more, the investors are also saying the demand for clean, renewable energy, for clean infrastructure, for the kinds of systems that are going to transform the way we all live around the world, those are real investment opportunities. And so the funds are really focusing how they're going to seize those opportunities as well.
So it seems right that you've got this focus that I'm sure I'm sure these numbers may be changing. 220 institutional investors, $44 trillion of assets under management, huge amounts of money that your network, your investor network, is paying attention to. So they've got this problem of what's going to happen in the market over the long term, but then they go into states where maybe there have been some political pushback by legislators who've established these laws that said, if you take into account fossil fuel you don't want to invest in fossil fuels, or if you take into account any kind of environmental legislation, the state can't do business with you. Now those laws they're going back and forth, and they're all in litigation. But how does that impact your network and those funds in terms of the investments they make, the politics?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the investors find themselves in a very difficult position, because, as I just explained, these are real material financial risks. So to say to an investor, you can't consider a whole category of risks to your portfolio, is really crazy. I mean, the investors just have to consider these risks. So they're going to be, thoughtful about how they talk about it. They're not acting on climate. They're acting on risk to the portfolio. They're going to say, well, I'm not looking for an investment in the climate transition or in clean tech. They're not going to label their investments that way, but they are going to keep looking for the real opportunities for the portfolios in every asset class. So I think unfortunately, the term has been used green hushing, and I hate to see it because I think these investors have to act boldly and speak boldly about what they're doing, but they got to keep doing the work. I think it would be crazy to think that one state doesn't want a big investor to consider the real risks to the portfolio or look for the best investment opportunities out there.
Well, Jamal, this goes to what we were just chatting about earlier in this conversation about being market driven, and investors use data and science and analysis, right? All of these things that are logical, and understanding climate risk, climate ambition, all of that is logical. It's similar to DEI, and we're seeing a backlash there. The backlash is to the terminology and to the feeling, but fundamentally, more diversity in your board, more diversity in your information, all of that is good for business. And the data is there for that too. So, Reverend, how then are you helping folks navigate this idea of a cultural problem with the terminology versus, okay, but there's real data and real information here. Can we just work with the facts now?
I think that's exactly what the investors say to me. Let's just work with the facts here. There are scientific facts. There is more and more good data about what companies are doing, and I think that's the key for a lot of our investors. They aren't moving the real economy. They're not the investors themselves are not the ones who are going to change our energy mix or change the ways that heavy emitting companies pollute, but they are going to work with those companies in their portfolios. And that's really where we see action happening. The investors talk to these companies. Many of them have long-term engagements, so they've been talking to the companies. They're working with the boards of directors of companies and talking about what data they need and how to really get companies to show the leadership that's going to position them to create good value for the long term. So it all comes down to that. What is a company doing? What's their target? What's their plan? How are they moving their capital expenditures? And even when it comes to advocacy, the investors are now saying to the companies, we want to be sure that your lobbying aligns with your business plan. So if you're going to position yourself for the next century or the next 2 centuries, we want to be sure that you're advocating for the policies and regulations that are going to support your action. So those are the kinds of things that investors are talking to companies about. And I expect that work to get even deeper because, as you said, the data is there. And there's going to be better, sharper data. And real progress gets measured and then managed, not just by the investors, but by the companies they hold.
I got to say, talking to you in the last couple of minutes, maybe it's because you're a woman of faith. It feels incredibly optimistic. I feel like, we've got a crisis that's happening on television every night, and we've got politics in Washington that look like they're headed in a direction away. But then talking to you, and you're engaging with these investors every single day. It feels like you've got a little bit of optimism. Am I wrong?
I do have some optimism, and one of my staff said to me the other day, "How do you stay hopeful?" And I do stay hopeful because I feel like I've got the most important players talking to me every day. They really are the ones who can make a difference, the companies and the investors. This isn't something that an advocacy organization can change, but with this group committed to doing what's right, and I really do think they are committed to doing what's right, that the change is coming. The science shows us the change is coming. And the question is how to position the planet, the people, and of course the investments in the right direction.
Jamal, I got the same feeling from the Reverend, and I appreciate it so much because now I have to recognize that there are people with money who are actually trying to do good and help solve the problems that we all face. So,
Yeah.
Reverend Kirsten Spalding with Series, thank you so much for joining us and ending us on a high note for our aptly named episode, Trailblaze.
Thank
Yes.
you so much.